So, like I said, for those of you who are already here, I'll start this part of the live just telling you a bit about me and what I do, who I am, and then we'll go in further into details about the webinar series that we're very excited to roll out in the upcoming weeks and sort of what you'll learn, what they'll entail, and what the idea is. So let's get to it. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave your comment in the live, and I'll try to make sure to answer as many questions as I possibly can throughout the live. So first things first, who am I? My name is Juliette Chevalier. I'm a software developer for Admios. And it's funny to even think about just me talking about this stuff online, because truth is that growing up, I never really saw myself as much of a math person or a technical person. I used to really avoid all these subjects. I wasn't really that good at math or science during high school. But somehow, eventually, throughout the way, I started noticing that that's where you were headed, right? So I grew up in Panama, born and raised, and the moment I graduated high school, I got a scholarship to study abroad. So I went to study in Chicago. I did political science and international relations, and I absolutely loved it. Don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed my 4 years of college. Would do them all over again. But while I was at school, I worked for a political campaign for a presidential candidate here in Panama. And that taught me a lot about the different types of people that existed in my country that I had never really had a connection with. And so when I graduated college, I was a bit torn in between these two sides, sort of my being abroad for the first time, living by myself, experiencing different cultures, getting to see what it really meant to be in an international space, yet at the same time really wanting to help my country and the place I've been born and bred and the place that I loved. So in between this bit of a hassle, I started applying for jobs at foreign service. I thought that would be the best way to sort of bridge those two. And eventually I started working as a diplomatic attaché to the permanent mission of Panama to the UN in Switzerland. So for those of you whom that was just some crazy long sentence, what that basically meant was that I was working as one of the representatives for Panama in topics such as mass migrations and refugee crisis, environmental issues, and women issues, gender issues. So I was meant to just be going to meetings, sort of establishing Panama's position, negotiating on behalf of Panama and all of these issues, etc. And of course, as a recent graduate, seeing in the field exactly what I had just studied, I was blown away. I was like, this is the opportunity of the lifetime, right? I gotta make sure that I'm taking notes about every meeting that I'm going to, writing all the problems, make sure that I'm able to leave a footprint in this job. Who knows how long I'll be able to be here. Diplomats change every few years. So for me, it was all about making sure that I was taking advantage of that time. So as I start writing things down, the months pass, and I kept just sort of coming across the same blockers. I was like, if we have the most expert people in the world dealing with these issues, we have most amount of money for dealing with these issues. Every country's giving us money, NGOs, people, even citizens themselves. We have the time. We've been working on these issues, since the UN was created in 1945. What are we missing, right? What are these obstacles that are not letting us actually solve these crises? Why do they even often keep getting worse? And so I started, just looking at my notes, trying to spot some patterns. And what I could see across organizations and across topics, it was that we had a deficiency in processes. We were using processes that were built in 1945 when the UN was created to solve issues of the 21st century. Of course, there was a big clash. Right? If it took us 6 months to establish a budget and then 6 more months to establish the project, by the time we actually implemented it among the refugee camps or the different organizations, at that point the technologies had already shifted and they were no longer relevant. We were just falling back of the curve. It was a big backlog. And so at that point, I realized we had to focus on processes. And that's when I started seeing how we could automate this. How could we make them more effective, more efficient, where the gaps were to really solve these massive problems. And at that point, I went into a dark hole of research. I found the bridge between politics and technology. I was like, this is the future. Where can we go? I started eating books, podcasts, TED Talks, you name it. And throughout this spree, I went back to work and I started sort of talking about these things, implementing them, trying to see how I could automate and make stuff at work more effective, more transparent, more efficient. And eventually I hit the constant roadblock of the system. So I was, after, careful deliberation and lots of research, I came to the realization that if I actually wanted to have an impact in the world, I needed to learn how to code. And don't get me wrong, I mean, for any of you who may have studied liberal arts or just something that's definitely not technical related, I was a bit sunk away by that realization. I didn't sort of want to face it. It was hard, but at the same time exciting. And so eventually I decided that I would quit my job and learn how to code. So what does that even mean? I needed something fast. I needed something effective. And eventually I found out through reviews and just online research, I found this coding bootcamp called Le Wagon, where in 9 weeks I would learn to code full stack and just get a wider perspective about what this meant. I never thought I'd be a developer. I just thought it'll give me a wider understanding of what this meant, and I could actually build some of these tools that I kept dreaming about. So that's what I did. I enrolled in Le Wagon in 2018, January. And once I was done, I was hooked. Because I realized that coding is not this mad science, intimidating, crazy stuff. It is crazy, but it's merely just solving problems. And as long as you have the right tools, you can solve any problem. Solving bugs is not math or science. It's literally just solving problems with the tools that you have at hand. So I started obsessing about it, started working for the bootcamp to TA at first, and just sharing the knowledge that I had been lucky to learn. At that point, I started freelancing for clients. I eventually ended up being one of the lead teachers for the batch. I started doing the whole, digital nomad rave, and it was a life-changing experience until I was looking for something more settled. And at that point, that's when I started applying for jobs back home and started working for Admios a few months ago. So I wanted to sort of give you that overview for you to first, understand who I am and what I'm trying to share with you. But the idea is that coding can be crazy, it can be intimidating, but really once we learn it, it's more about the problems that you're trying to solve. So whether you come from marketing, you come from design, you come from politics, you come from whatever your background is, coding is just a way to do what you love, but more efficiently, more effectively, quicker, to a wider audience, in a more sustainable manner. It has a lot of powers to just build your ideas. And so having that said, I want to touch upon the main reasons why we wanted to even do these webinar series in the first place. And that's because right now, a lot of us most of us, I think, are in lockdown, just staying at home, having some extra free time that we didn't have before. And a lot of us are looking for ways to keep being productive during this time. So we thought, why not just share a bit of what we know with the world? Women are usually, sadly, left a bit more out of this conversation than men. So we thought we'd tailor it for women, invite all men who want to join. Definitely feel free to come to our series. And the idea is that we'll give you a bit of a holistic perspective about what this tech world means. So we'll touch upon some HTML, some CSS, we'll do some JavaScript animations. We'll touch upon some basic programming, like backend. And the idea is just for you to get a better glimpse of what this world means and hopefully get some new skills to add on to the resume and tackle whatever issues you're dealing with, either it's at home, with your family, for work, or whatever it is that you're facing today or even moving forward. So, having that said, please ask any questions you may have regarding the series, regarding the story, maybe some inquiries that you may have about how it would look to learn to code for you, some challenges. Yeah, I'll open the floor for whatever questions you may have. I see that there was already one posted on top, and it says, what advantage do you think girls have over guys when it comes to programming, and how can they use those skills to excel? That's a very good question. So first, a bit of a disclaimer. I'd like to think that we're equal in a lot of ways, most ways, and that a woman can learn to code as much as a guy can. I don't think there's really that much of a difference. I would say, if anything, some studies will suggest, and I talk here with a bit of a skepticism, but some studies will suggest that women can multitask easier than men. If you open any developer's computer, you'll see thousands of tabs, thousands of programs open, thousands of stuff just rolling around from the server to the terminal to the application itself, where learning how to multitask is a very good skill to have. Also, I think it's a lot of teamwork. I think oftentimes programming is seen, and I think this is very stereotypical, right, of just men in movies sitting in a basement coding their days away, when really programming is very social based. In developers, you gotta learn how to ask questions, you gotta help each other out, you gotta pair program. And so I think that's often also a place where women may excel. Although, like I said before, I think it shouldn't be a gender thing, and it's definitely proven that throughout the years, women have come to get into programming. But when they do, they can do it just as well as men do. It's just that it has been harder to come into the fields, which is something that we're definitely trying to improve with this series. So that'd be my take on it. Okay, we have another question. It says, knowing yourself when you were 15 years old, when you didn't see yourself in the technical field, what will the Juliette from now will tell the 15-year-old to motivate her to try this? Oof, that's a tough one. I like that. So I think one of my big blockers, at least, was that I never thought myself of a math person. I think the mistake that we're doing is sort of putting those labels on ourselves. And that wasn't something that my mom told me or the teacher told me. It was more, I think, even the counter effect. I was just told that I was a good writer or that I was good at debating. Therefore, I couldn't be good at both. There's this big stereotype that you can't be good at arts and also be good at technical space. So that's definitely one stereotype that I think we need to break and just delete the labels from people. It's very psychological. And also to not be intimidated by walking into a man-driven field. I think, especially if my experience at Admios has taught me anything, is that men, as long as you create the good culture for any company, then you can be just as welcome into the space as men can. It's all about empowering diversity, and I think it's becoming ever more relevant as we start seeing products that are only built maybe by men, Indian, Chinese, or American in a specific, Silicon Valley space. That takes a lot of diversity out of the product, and the consumer can feel that because 50% of consumers and users are women. And we come from all sorts of nationalities. So definitely just empowering diversity into the space is already, I think, a huge win for the day. Okay, we have another question. It says, what do you like most about your career, Macarena? Whew, there's a lot. I'd say for me, to be honest, it's sort of the end goal. when you're able to see the power that you have with a script of code, you can automate these chores that would usually take hours or that would make processes in a way that actually even harm people. Code has a way of just enabling you to see in a clearer, faster spectrum what would otherwise take lots of time in the traditional space. So at least for me, it's very rewarding knowing that my work has so many positive benefits and that they can reach people from all sorts of spaces, because that's the other thing. I think internet is one of the biggest democratizing tools of our age, where as long as someone has a device and they have internet, then they can do exactly the same things that anyone can do in the most condensed cities from from the best backgrounds. So definitely seeing that leveling playing field is a big motivator for me, and it's one of the things I love most about being a developer. Hello, Pedro from Paraguay. We have some other questions here from AJ. It says, what is your favorite part of yourself that this phase of life has helped you discover about yourself? Ooh, that's a good one. I think for me it was sort of the change in mindset. Having always been used to playing with a holistic perspective on things, I used to always see the grays, right? So nothing was black or white. We could always just sort of pick and grab and build something in between. And that's a very useful skill to have. But it's also very useful to think of things in a more logical perspective. So if this happens and only if this happens, then this can get executed, then this can get executed. And it sort of teaches you that different mindset of making decisions, of seeing possibilities of what's for seeing the possibilities of what's possible, for helping others even in their decision-making processes. So a decision as easy as, do we go to the restaurant or do we go to the movies, can all of a sudden have a different turn when you start thinking of thinking programmatically. So I'd say for me, that's a part of my brain that I always had shut down, and that as I've grown into coding, it's just sort of, it keeps popping up, and that's been very powerful for me in my personal life as well as my professional life. So I have another question from Vero, who says, what would I learn in the developer series and give me enough information to create my own webpage? So yes and no. So the idea about this is that we'll give you some tools where, yes, if you learn them right, we'll give you enough resources so that you can build your own webpage. But the idea is that a lot of it will also come from your curiosity and how much work you put into it. To be completely honest, coding, like many other professions, is a lot of practice. So it does depend on how much work you put into it and what you want to get out of it as well. So I'll say yes, we'll give you enough information so that you can build your own webpage, but it's definitely going to come with your hard work and to your curiosity about what you do with it. So we have another question, Fernando, who says, have you ever had second thoughts on this career choice? Yes, actually. I think, to be honest, I think this is not particular for me. I think all developers go through this in the sense that we all face a big imposter syndrome when we're dealing with tasks that we don't yet know how to solve. And this is very common, right? I said it earlier, coding is problem solving. And that means we have a problem that we sort of don't know how to fix, and then we research it around, and then we come up with a solution. So that imposter syndrome, especially at first, hit very hard on the ego. That's usually when I consider a career change and I say I'm done. I can't do this. It's not for me. But then you code it out, you figure it out, you see the results, and then you sort of go into that loop like, I'm a queen, I can do this, and whatever's in front of me. And, you sort of go through it again. You get a new task, and then you don't know, and then that comes in. But to be fair, I mean, I think it's that duality that always comes with pain and pleasure, right? The more it hurts, the more you also feel rewarded and yeah, and feel good about it. So even, putting that together with the question that I was asked earlier about the things I like most about my career, it's also that challenge factor that keeps things interesting. It keeps you always learning and moving on forward. Cool. So we have another question. Can I send you my resume? Awesome. You've been shared some emails there. Definitely apply if you're looking for jobs. Admios is a great company. We have another question, AJ, who says, what's next? Ooh, what's next for me? Well, at the moment, I'm good where I am. What's next is to just keep learning, keep coding, getting into possibly more DevOps. I just got into some mobile development, so I want to make sure I'm tackling that. More JavaScript, possibly AWS, and sort of, architecture fun. We'll see. I think time will tell, and as long as I keep learning and liking what I'm doing, I do think that time will have a way of its own. So, okay, some other question. P. Fran says, I'm in 6th grade. What course or language is best to get started? That is a great question. So I would say, Fran, if you're in 6th grade, you're already in a great spot. So welcome in, and I'm very happy that you're here. I would try something where you can see what you're building. So I would try out Scratch. If you haven't checked that out, definitely look it up. It's a program built by MIT where they do coding in blocks. So the idea is that you can eliminate and forget about all the crazy syntax that we have to deal with. You don't want to be bored with curly brackets and that sort of stuff. But you're able to apply the same programming concepts that are crucial to understanding development. So I would say play with Scratch as much as you can. And when you get bored and you already, have it all figured out, start then playing with some code. Especially if you are an English speaker, I would say Ruby is a fairly easier one to get started. Also, Python can be more similar to English, which makes it easier. But if you already have the coding base really grounded down, then honestly, possibilities are endless. So play with that and then hit me up. I'll give you some cool coding games to build and some extra challenges. Some other question. We have Frank who says, I'd love to become a web developer, but I always get stuck at CSS. Do you think it is a must-have skill in the programming world, or do I have to focus in a language first? Oh man, totally relatable. I've been the same. When I first started coding, I went fully backend exactly because of that reason. I just wanted to avoid CSS as much as I could. And I think it is doable in the sense that you can just stay in backend where you don't have to actually play with the graphical interface and have that be done by someone else. But I think eventually you'll come around it. So it's one of those things where it's inevitable. It's very weird that you'll have an application without a graphical interface. So you'll probably will get into it eventually. But if you don't like it, then definitely just put it aside. Go to another programming language, be it Ruby, be it Python, be it JavaScript, and then come back to it whenever you're feeling more comfortable and whenever you're feeling that you're getting more of a grasp. Because it's one of those things where it might not always make sense. Why isn't that in the left corner where I want it in the right? Or all sorts of, crazy questions. Where is that div, right? But the more you start getting into the habit of debugging, then finding those things becomes easier. So in regards to CSS tips, I would say open that inspector console as much as you can and just play with it there. So, rather than changing stuff in the editor and then going back to the browser to see how that looks, just code it right in the inspector. They'll also offer you some options so that you can see what you can do. I don't know what your code editor of choice is, but if you use VS Code, for example, I think I know there's a plugin where you can just tap on the property and it'll tell you what that does, what your options are. So it gives you documentation inside of your code editor for when you're doing it. So that can be really useful as well. And my third tip is just do it often. You know, practice, fail, keep practicing, and get some challenges, build your own sites, even if it's just random design, but just make yourself practice, and that'll just take you uphill where you want to go. So Carla, she says, I have a business background, but I'm trying to change careers. Would it be enough to go to a coding bootcamp? Or should I just go back to school and get a computer science degree? Should I do both? Great question. This is actually something I've been very fascinated about because I myself didn't study computer science. Like I said, for those of you who weren't here then, I did political science and international relations. So I come from a very similar space where I didn't know much of computer science. But I think the more I've been asking around, I see that companies are usually looking for a bit of both. And what do I mean by that? Is that a person with a computer science degree will will know more about computer science than a person then graduating from a coding bootcamp. But even then, oftentimes, people in computer science are not taught web development, they're not taught mobile development, or just frameworks that are actually used daily by the companies in the modern day. So those skills and that thought process is very relevant to a company. But oftentimes, people from a coding bootcamp might have a more modern stack. They might also come from a background that's different than just computer science, so they may have a wider and more holistic vision on how to solve the problems that developers usually have to solve. So I would say, in all honesty, it'll depend about you and what you want to do with that knowledge moving on forward. I'd say you can definitely just do a bootcamp and get a job as a software developer. It takes work. Coding bootcamps are intense. It's probably been one of the most intense experiences of my life. It's draining, but it's also rewarding. You know, it's that pain and pleasure that we were discussing earlier. But it was life-changing. So I would say maybe do a coding bootcamp at first, get a glimpse of it, see if you like it. And if you feel like that's enough, go through that route. Otherwise, then definitely get that computer science degree. I mean, it'll never hurt. And if you can and want to, maybe you haven't done university or master's degree. If you have that opportunity, I really want to do it. So definitely go for it if that's for you. We have some other questions. Pedro asked me where I'm from and what's my name. So I'm Juliette Chevalier. I'm from Panama, born and bred. So yeah, I just came back after living abroad for almost 8 years, but I've been born and raised here, and that's where I'm from. Some other questions. I see it says, have you found it challenging working in a male-predominant atmosphere? If so, how have you overcome this? So it's a very, very good question. To be honest and completely transparent, I'd say it has its pros and cons, like everything. The cons being that, yes, you're in a male-predominant environment in the sense that often when I was interviewing for jobs and I asked what was the women ratio in a company, often the rate was only 1 or maybe 2. I don't think I ever got a number higher than 2. So that is hard because it means that you're dealing with only men who can, depending on the culture of the company, be very predominant. I've been in circumstances where other developers, and this happened a lot even with students I was teaching to, who maybe just didn't respect my opinions or thought that I didn't know what I was talking about, and that's definitely something to overcome. Like in any gender-based career, like maybe salon or even nurses, you know, it comes a bit with that challenge. But the reality is, the pro there is that because you're so rare, you could even, when you actually do solve those issues, it even puts you at a higher point. So it's all about playing with that reality and seeing where can you have it go. Also, especially if you're just starting out or if you're just coming into the field, there are less women developers out there. So there's lots of opportunity for diversity, lots of supporting groups, lots of communities, just trying to empower more women to get into the field. And I think that definitely opens up possibilities where maybe males with the certain circumstances couldn't join. So I'd say like everything, just, pros and cons. It's playing with what we got, right? I'm not going to change my gender, so we got to make the best of it. We have another question from Pedro who says, I don't speak English well, but in some US companies that have interviewed me, they have not tried to hire me for that reason. My language native is Spanish. Pedro, yes. I think this is something that honestly shocked me a lot as I was coming into the field, is that in order to develop, you do need to understand English well, just because most of documentations are in English and lots of the research out there usually is. I would say, honestly, before even going there, try to focus on maybe learning a bit more on it and maybe just getting a bit more lingo. I think the more you read on code, you'll also be able to know more English words on it, and that'll definitely up your game. So that's a good space to grow, if you want to see it like that. Bajita Vane says, what will I learn in the developer series? Cool. So the idea here is that we will be tackling some HTML, CSS, we'll touch a bit about JavaScript, and then we'll do some backend programming. So from a holistic perspective, ideally, this is something that you'll join in every time we do it, which will be every 2 weeks. And we'll start off with some basic HTML, getting to see how you can structure a page, getting to understand how the internet works. Every time we actually call up a URL, what's happening on the back of the cyberspace. And then from then on, we'll start adding on some design with CSS, see how we can animate that to see some of the animations we see everywhere online. So we'll be using JavaScript for that. And then from then on, we'll see a bit of just what programming is on the back end. So what's that big difference between front end, back end, and then some of those crucial programming concepts like variables, conditional statements, loops, etc. We also, and before I even go further, something else that we want to do is that the first episode after this one, we'll have it be a no-code hacks type of episode. So the idea is to get you to trying some of these power of code that I've been talking about without having to know any code. Ideally to get you started and get you to seeing what's possible and get you motivated to then be wanting to keep on moving forward and learning how to code it from scratch. So that's basically what we'll be covering for now. But of course, if you have any suggestions or anything that you really want to see being talked about, we'd love to hear that, and we're just open to adapting it to whatever the needs are, really. The idea is that you're able to get the most out of it and hopefully gain a few skills that'll up your game. We have a question by Ale who says, could you provide us more information regarding the coding bootcamp? Costs, places, is it online or face-to-face? So this will depend upon what bootcamp you're looking for and what you want to gain out of it. I usually tell people who are looking to get into boot camps, I would ask them what they want to learn code in the first place for, and then start digging back from there as to which boot camp to pick, where to go, what language to learn, etc. So in terms of prices, they usually range from all the way from like $6,000 for maybe like a 9-week boot camp, all the way up until like $20,000 for a 12-week one. So the range is very wide. It depends again on what you're looking and where you go, but definitely something to look into. I don't want to give you some boot camps because I think it's unfair. I think just if you Google best coding boot camps, you should be able to get a good list and get a glimpse of what they are. And you have some that are online and some that are face-to-face. So that's definitely interesting, whatever your choice is. There's also some schools that are applying a different type of module in the sense that they'll teach you to code first, and then whenever you get a job, they'll take a bit of your salary afterwards. So that's also a different module in case you don't want to pay that much. But then it comes with that hack that by the end of it, you do have to give them some money for a longer period of time. So things to consider. There's a lot of options out there. I just start by figuring out what you want to learn it for, and then start Googling from there on which one will be best for you. Fernando asks something else. He says, how long each episode will be in terms of time? So we're thinking it'll be an hour. The idea is that it'll be interactive, where I'll teach some stuff, then I'll separate you into break rooms online where you can start working in pairs, and then we'll come back to it and keep asking questions so that we can get a flow of where people are and progress together. So the idea is that they'll be an hour long at most. So we have another question. Nicole says, one of those schools that you're mentioning is Holberton School. Check it out. Oh yeah, cool. I haven't heard of that, but if Nicole is sharing, I'm sure it'll be interesting. There's tons of schools out there, to be honest. It's just a matter of Googling online, and I'm sure you'll see a lot. So we've gotten some other questions. And here he says, do you recommend a specific mock or course online? So depends. Again, I don't want to say this again, but it does depend on what you want to do with your code. For example, one online course that I found really helpful was Harvard and Yale's CS50, which is basically Harvard and Yale's basic course for a computer science degree, and it's really well done. Lots of videos, great challenges to build. And I would definitely recommend that. It's an EDX and it's free. So it's a good intro course for getting into computer science. But that would be more of a computer science course. If you want to get more into web development, if you go into Code Academy, they have great introductory courses to learn JavaScript, learn Ruby, learn HTML, learn CSS, etc. And even there's this teacher called Wes Boss, who I've learned a lot from. He has a really good free JavaScript course called JS30, where we do JavaScript challenges for 30 days. I would also very much recommend that one. But then at that point you need to know some HTML and CSS. So just think about that. We have some other questions. Who said, what do you recommend to learn programming? A course, a book? What's the best way? So I think a book is a good way when you already have played a bit with it. So I'd recommend first doing a course, then trying to sort of implement in your own way, maybe with a small app that solves one of your problems, or even just a personal website. So definitely I'd say after a course, try implementing that knowledge in some sort of way, and then you can move on to books, which will go deeper into the reasons why you were doing stuff in the first place. But I think oftentimes if we start with reading, but we're not seeing and playing with the trial and error, it can be a bit hard to understand the concepts until we see them on the ground. So that would be my recommendation. Fernando says, what about registration? Where can you sign up? So that is a great question. We'll be posting a link in our bio on Instagram where you can sign up. And ideally, we're also going to be showing the Zoom ID and the link where you can just join the meetings. So whichever one works best for you, but definitely if you want to register, that'll make it easier for us to send you the invite every week, and you'll be more aware of what's going on in the course. Another question, it says, learn to code the hard way, really good and hands for coding. Awesome. I haven't seen it, but if someone's recommending it, then it's definitely, I think, worth a check. Okay, so best CSS practices, we already answered that one for Frank. And then we also have another question from Luis saying that you mentioned you wanted to learn to code to solve problems. Can you tell us, oh, sorry, I can't read it. Can you tell us what problems you have faced and how you solved them? Yeah. So I think the biggest problem I faced, especially starting out, was that switch that I was mentioning before. It was really hard for me to understand that things could only get executed once previous things had been done. And sort of understanding that stack and that flow of things was definitely a big challenge for me. I would say, how did I solve them? Honestly, Google. And if I can say the biggest, most important skill I've gained through coding, I would honestly say that I'm a better researcher thanks to it. It's crazy to see the amount of information that is online that we often just, we'll ask the question in our brains, or we'll just think, oh, this is impossible. We can't do it. I can't fix my phone. I can't cook a butternut squash. I don't know what this and this is. And you just type it online, and I'm sure someone else in the world at some point in history has probably struggled through the same thing. So definitely one of the best things I've learned, and the way I've usually, even today, I solve most of my issues, is just Googling and knowing what to copy paste, what to adapt, and what goes where. And that part comes a lot with just practicing, trial and error, and just trying stuff out. So another big part of it is sort of losing the fear of trying stuff out, right? I think we've often been raised to be a big scared to fail. And in programming, failing is the best thing that can happen, because you get the error message, and then from then on you can know where to go. So it's less about being afraid to fail, and it's more about learning how to use that failure to your advantage and learn from that, which is also a great skill to have in life. So I'd say that's my usual obstacles. Okay, we have another question from Carlos, who says, do you recommend to read about agile methodologies, Scrum, etc. before jumping into interviews? Yes, definitely. I think even if the company that you're applying to doesn't use Agile or Scrum, it's still an important methodology to know, because the entire industry is using it. And so it'll also get you more into understanding your process as a developer. So oftentimes you have a feature to work on, you have a task to implement, and thinking of it in time scales, thinking about it how you know how much time you'll have to implement that feature, gets you already thinking into the type of company that you'll be working on and the type of processes that you'll be dealing with throughout your time there. So definitely, I'd say the more you know about Agile and Scrum, honestly, not only in interviews, but for your daily life and whatever tech career or even non-tech space you come into, it's a great topic to discuss and be thinking about on a daily basis. So that's all the questions we have for now. If you have any questions, shoot them your way. I think we'll be closing up soon. It's already been 45 minutes, so I don't want to take away your time for the beautiful evening. But please feel free to keep shooting us questions. Moving on forward, if you have questions about the webinar, if you have questions about getting into coding, women in the tech space, definitely feel free to shoot your questions this way. And we have another one saying, at this point, looking back on your road, do you feel there was some mistake, something you would have done differently? Know what you have with more experience. Yes, definitely. I think my biggest mistake when I started to code, and this is something that I've been reading about happens to a lot of people, is that I got a bit stuck in what's colloquially known as the tutorial purgatory, meaning that I just got obsessed with doing tutorials. There was so much stuff I needed to know that I would just jump on any tutorial that came up in my Instagram feed, on Facebook or whatever. And that wasn't that productive. I think the best way to learn to code is to have a problem that you want to solve, and then learn your way back into what tech stack would be better to solve that problem. What are you missing? What do you have? Sort of start implementing stuff to fix something that you're facing, rather than just learn to learn. And this is very hard because in technology and in programming, there is so much out there. Technologies change every day. We innovate stacks every day. There's always a new hype. And if we just get absorbed by these hypes, it's very hard to get deeper into subjects and move on forward. So definitely I'd say one advice I would give myself a year, 2 years ago would be stop doing every tutorial that's online. Focus on building something and then do tutorials when you actually reach the problems that you want to be fixing. Okay. If there are any more questions for now, shoot them. Otherwise, please feel free to keep this channel open and send us whatever questions you may have. We'll be starting with the first episode on 2 weeks. Like I said, we'll be seeing no-code hacks. So it's technologies that are already out there that can help us automate our own processes, that can help us be more effective and more efficient in what we're trying to solve. And this is for people, complete beginners. You don't need to have any coding experience. You don't even need to be any tech savvy at all. And I will do my best to show you some great tools that I've learned along the way. This will be in 2 weeks, like I said, so next 2 Wednesdays from now. And we'll be posting the link in our bio with all the information you'll need from now on. So if there are no more questions, it was great talking to all of you. Thank you so much for all of your questions. If you have anything else, shoot it our way, and hopefully we'll be seeing each other in 2 Wednesdays from now. Hope you guys have a great evening, and these will be posted online for the next 24 hours in our account. So if you have any friends who you think this might be helpful for, or just anyone who might find this information useful, please feel free to look it up, and hopefully they'll be able to find it there. Have a great night, and goodbye.